Okay, welcome back. So now we're going to go in and change a few parameters and kind of fine tune our settings. Fine tune our particles, add collisions, and so the first thing I'm going to do actually is delete the cache in the particles, and I'm going to create some particles that have different colors on them. So then we can add that to the smoke, and by using color emission we can kind of give more variance in the type of smoke that we're going to emit, which will just kind of make things a bit more interesting. So in the particles, let's just go into shading, and in color I'm just going to create kind of maybe a brownish, a light brown, something like that. And let's grab another one. Maybe let's make that a gray. And then over here, let's do another kind of a darker brown. So there we go. Now if we change this to randomize ID, we'll see the color of our particles will change the moment we color randomize here. So with a value of 1, they're all going to be pretty randomized within these values on the ramp here. So that's all I really want to do. So we've got a few different colors. So that's going to be pretty great. Let's go ahead and cache that out again at 0.5. There we go. So now we're going to go into our particle source, and first off let's go and add in the color. So we want to set the color here and use the RGB PP values. So that's all we need to do. Now it's going to set the color of the smoke based on the particles. And while we're here, we're just going to change a couple of things in the particles themselves. And we're going to turn on free flow. And this isn't totally necessary in this shot, but we're going to use it anyways because it'll make things run a little faster. And what free flow is going to do, we're going to use this for collisions as well. It's going to not actually collide with the fluid itself. It's only going to use the object as velocity. So there'll be no actual collisions or penetrating of the smoke through the geometry or particles. And this is just way easier to solve. So if you tend to have some crashing down the road in some more complex shots, a lot of it could be down to your collisions, and a lot of times you need the accuracy and a lot of times you don't. So we're going to keep this fairly simple for now and see how it goes. And as well as we're going to lower the radius. Initially they were quite large. I want a lot smaller of these streaks, so let's lower this to 0.35 and the radius here to 0.2. So I want it to get quite a bit smaller as it's going along. So it's starting at 0.35 and it's just going to fade off a lot quicker. So continuing down here, let's just take a look at one more thing. And that's the velocity amount here. We're just going to change the variance to 25. And this is going to give us more of a kind of turbulent emission off the particle itself. So that's it for that. Let's go in and create a collision. And the collision as well, as I mentioned before, we're going to use free flow. And let's just take a look at our chopper here. I'm going to add in the main body and the blades, and that's about it. So let's shift select and add that in. And it all kind of depends on your geometry. This geometry is pretty sound, but so we could use shell. Although I know for this, collisions aren't going to make such a big difference. It's just the velocity that we're going to need because they're going up and out so fast. The collision itself isn't really going to make much of a difference. So we can save a little time by not having to sim a solid or shell collision. So let's just go free flow, and it's just going to grab the velocity. So that's all we want for collisions. So now let's go into our fume container, And let's just make a couple of final adjustments here. Now, one thing, I think it's rising up a little too fast. So with this size of container, we can easily cheat that and make it look bigger by lowering the gravity. So I'm going to lower the gravity by half. And also the main change I want to do is to the turbulence. I want to bring it up a little bit to 0.05 and half the scale. So with a lower scale, we'll get a little bit more finer detail in the smoke itself, and it won't be much of a snake-like. You can see the size of the turbulence here. So with less, we'll definitely get a little bit more of detail in the smaller areas. And so also we're going to change the fuel. We're going to change the burning process to a model with oxygen. And oxygen is just going to make it combust when the temperature is higher than the ignition temperature. And we'll get a little combustion going on, which just makes things a little bit more interesting. We'll increase the burn rate to about 50. I just want to have the fire burn off a little faster. And most of what we're seeing here, we can change in the shading of the black body shader to really fine tune how fast we want the fire to fade out in that. But in the sim itself, I definitely want to have it burn a bit quicker. In the smoke and the temperature, we're going to leave it as it is. And remember, we're starting to emit color here into the smoke, so we're going to have to select Simulate Color. And we're not using an effector to do it. We're just going to grab it from the particles themselves, which we have set here. So, all right. And finally, I'm going to lower the spacing, double the resolution. So I've got a machine of 24 gigabytes of RAM, which is a bit limited, although for this, the particles aren't really getting out to the edge of the box. It's going about 2/3 of the way to the edge, or 3/4. So I'm pretty confident that my 24 gigs aren't going to be used. It'll probably use about half of this. So the spacing of 0.25, I think that's about as much as I can push my machine. Now I'd really hope to have a 64 gigabyte machine to do this shot, in which case we could double the resolution of this as well. So there we go. We've got the collisions in there. We've adjusted the particles and are emitting color. And we've adjusted some of the parameters within the fluid. Emitting color, lowered the turbulence noise, having it burn faster, and burning it with oxygen. And there we go. So let's just set off a sim of this and let's come back and see how it looks. Alright, so we have our final simulation here, and it's looking pretty good. Got a lot of interesting things going on. And you can see that how it's taking a little bit of the fire and smoke with it. But when we get to the main simulation, it's going to cover a lot of this area, so we'll get a lot more interesting fire and smoke coming off the chopper itself. So there we go, that's it for this clip. Now in the next clip, we'll start going in and setting up the main hit.